Welcome. My name is Carol Carter, and I'm the founder and CEO of GlobalMindED. We are a 501c3 that focuses on first generation to college, underrepresented, and students who deserve to have networks, role models, mentors, internships, and jobs, but don't necessarily come from situations of wealth where those kinds of circumstances are provided for them. So we are officially launching our 2020 conference today with our higher education track this week. We have a number of different sessions all week. You can sign up for those on our website or through our daily newsletter. And we're delighted today to have some people who are really pioneering for first generation to college and underrepresented students in higher education. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Karen Vignare. She's a Ph.D. and an M.B.A. She's a strategic innovator, leveraging emerging technologies to improve access, success, and flexibility within higher education. As the Executive Director for the Personalized Learning Consortium at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, Karen manages a network of universities committed to student success through personalization. She also oversees several adaptive courseware grants, providing leadership and support to multiple public four-year institutions. She has been leading a scaling initiative with 8 pioneering universities since 2016, many of which are seeing improved student success rates and higher retention. It's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Megan Tesene. She is the Associate Director of Personalized Learning Consortium at APLU. Megan directs the Adaptive Courseware for Early Success grant for Personalized Learning Consortium. In this role, she supports and collaborates with academic leadership from a variety of four-year universities to effectively adopt and implement adaptive learning technologies. Her work centers on enhancing pedagogy, closing the achievement gaps, improving accessibility, and ensuring that students from all walks of life have the support and the resources necessary to graduate. And we are delighted that both of these experts today are first generation to college themselves. So it is really important in our community. We have so many students that watch these webinars and also see them on our YouTube channel, where this event will be posted in the next 24 hours. It's really important for students to see themselves in the people who are their faculty members and also are their leaders. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Karen and Megan, and thank you so much for being a part of our event 2020 virtual in this COVID situation, and for being flexible to be able to really pivot and share your insights with people today.
Thank you, Carol. It was a very kind introduction and we appreciate it. And we welcome all the participants and those of you that are hopefully going to listen later on. Megan and I are excited to be here, not only because we are both first gen, but because some of the work that we're doing is really important for how to help students actually get a better start in higher education. Megan, do you want to flip the slide? And we like to provide a little bit of context. And while this isn't completely oriented to whether or not you're a first gen, there's often a lot of correlation between our first gen students and their family income level. And what you can see in this is that if you are from our second or our bottom socioeconomic group in the United States, the likelihood that you're getting a degree is actually really small, and it's unfortunate. We were beginning to see a little bit of bump. Our public universities had done a lot over the last 2 to 3 years to actually improve retention, and we were beginning to see a little bit of bump. But this work is so fundamental. We need everyone in higher ed working towards these goals. Megan, we can go ahead and flip to the next slide. And here's where we're also gathering more information. And that is, where are the problems? The persistent equity gaps that we have for these low-income students and our first-gen and students of color are typically in the beginning, and that's why our title is really about equity and student success in your high enrollment gateway. They could be referred to as your foundation courses. I often refer to them as your first experience courses. But if you look at this again, we can see that those first year courses are where we have persistent achievement gaps. And what we're here to talk about is how do we change that? So we wanted to introduce you to a student. Megan, if we go to the next slide. Here is a student at Northern Arizona. She's actually part of the active and adaptive work at Northern Arizona. And you can read her text on the slide, what she had to say, but what we're really interested in sharing with you is that there are real students in these courses that are affected by the work that we all get to do together. We need to make sure that quality, need to make sure that access, and we need to make sure that costs are reasonable, but at the same time, it has to be improving the quality of the student learning. And the tools that we use often do that. So here's another student, Dominique. What's a beautiful smile, at the University of Mississippi. She's really interested. Her whole family is behind her because she wants to get a degree. They want her to have a good job. And in order to do that, she's got to get through these first year courses. And the tools that we're starting to use are really about those first year courses. Now that I introduced you to two students, let's talk a little bit about where this work is situated. Megan, you want to think? So the wide world of digital learning in higher ed has always been about increasing use and impact. It's always been about access. Access to online programs have given so many adult learners, some of them are also first generation students, the flexibility to continue a degree, to finish a degree, or to get a graduate degree. Only recently, and I'd say 5-6 years, have we been using online and digital learning in ways that are about improving our online courses, because courses are also important to students. We know already about 30% of our students are taking online courses, and that's to improve the flexibility they need in order to manage very busy lives. And the tools that we work with support all the way through digital learning, and faculty are working very hard to leverage these tools. Megan, can we move on? So what is the adaptive courseware in this situation? It is a digital teaching tool with instruction assessments that are scoped and sequenced that support an entire course. What does that really mean? It means that students get this personalized, nonlinear instruction as they begin to answer questions. And what does it also mean? What's not on here? It means that students get to practice, and then it means that faculty get data. And with that data, faculty can then personalize or make the classroom, even if it's an online classroom, much more active, directed to where are the student gaps in learning. I think we can go ahead. Well, here's another student, again, with this great smile. And she's willing to say to you, how is this helping her become a more confident student? And this is really important to do early on. Diamond wants to be a very successful student. I actually got the pleasure of meeting Diamond when I was at University of Mississippi, and she's such a wonderful person that it was such a pleasure to hear how hard she's working at order to finish her degree. And these kinds of tools give students like Diamond the chance to actually move ahead and be successful. Let's talk a little bit about what we know. There's been a whole decade of research done by groups like Digital Promise and SRI. The things that make the work in digital learning much more impactful is we know, generally speaking, that when these courses are taught in a 4-year, and usually that's because those are larger enrollment courses. So you can see that the class section is a little bit higher. We also know that these tools work better in science, math, statistics, and psychology. We know that these tools are where the instruction with adaptive courseware is combined with instruction occurring primarily face-to-face. Now, in this COVID world, we want to be very, very clear. We know that there is success out there when you're doing this work online, right? There's a lot of active learning that is done online. So we believe you can also use these tools successfully in a primarily online course along with the face-to-face course, right? And we also know that the conditions for success are typically, if we can get these into our full-time faculty hands. Megan, I think we can go to the next one. So to look at a few more practices that we have learned over time, right? We have to be working with instructors who want to do this work. And we truly believe most of our faculty are very interested in student success and they work really hard, but they need additional support. We're not going to see additional support in terms of faculty, more faculty, smaller classes. Those things are not possible in our budget and financially constrained world. That's why we need to get them to know something about courseware. We need to make sure, though, that they get super training and understand how this works for first-generation students. We need to make sure that the demonstrations of the courseware are integrated into what campus leadership is also trying to do, right? And that there are peers that they can connect with. I think at this point I can turn it over to Megan, my colleague, and I'm excited to do that because I'm wait to listen to what Megan has to tell us.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Carol, and the GlobalMindED community for having both Karen and I on today. I'm excited to share kind of our next wave of institutions that we've been working with. Carol mentions that the PLC has been working with 8 universities since 2016 in the area of adaptive learning. We are now in our next phase of implementation. We're working very closely. APLU is working with 6 universities, and some of our colleagues over at Achieving the Dream are working in the 2-year space with 7 institutions. You'll see Digital Promise here referenced. Our colleague over at Digital Promise, Dr. Julie Neisler, has been assisting with the data analysis from the institutions that we've been working with. And we've deemed these the Lighthouse institutions because we're really looking to learn about what good implementation looks like on the ground at a variety of different types of institutions with different or varying levels of institutional supports and resources. As Karen was mentioning, we are focused on really redesigning these critical gateway courses for students as well as faculty. And one of the primary things that we do, that APLU does with these institutions, is that we set up a team on the ground, usually led by some upper level administration, but also integrating faculty and faculty support staff, instructional designers, teaching and learning center folks, tutoring service, and other student advising networks, really to take a community and team-based approach to this rather than, handing over a technological tool to a faculty member and saying, hey, figure it out and improve those course outcomes. We see teaching and learning as a community and institutional effort that needs to be supported. So how do we provide faculty with the resources on campus to create good educational experiences for their students, but also how do we use some of these technologies that we've been implementing and ways to identify students who are more at risk and connecting them not only with the faculty or a student teacher or tutor, or getting them connected with other campus resources that they might need that perhaps has nothing to do with their academic success in the sense of, you know, how are they doing in their courses, but, you know, maybe they need help with financial aid or, you know, mental health, those types of things. We find that identifying those students early on is critical to their success in doing well in these courses and staying enrolled in those courses and completing their degrees. So I'm going to review some of our initial pilot data from this new grant through the Every Learner Everywhere Network. APLU is one of 12 organizations. This grant is funded through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as was our first grant. The fall of 2019, back when things were still normal, is when their first semester of implementation for this particular project. So across those 13 universities, 10 of them had piloted in the fall. By the spring, all 13 were implementing. And when I say implementing, I mean they were using adaptive courseware technologies as part of the grant project, but it's also about course and curriculum design and working with teams on the ground to align their pedagogy and their course outcomes and their practices in the classroom. The classes that we implemented in they were identified because they're considered, you know, those critical introductory courses, but also because there are those equity gaps that are persistent and consistent, where students of color and first generation students, lower income students, are not performing as well as their more privileged peers. You can see that we had a wide variety in terms of the types of classes. Now in our first grant, we have a lot of implementation beyond these disciplines, but predominantly in those biochem and STEM courses, we're seeing a lot of implementation, touching almost 14,000 students in that first semester, about twice that around the spring term as well. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about is how are we supporting the faculty that are on the ground to do this work. We had conducted surveys with our partners at Digital Promise to learn about you know, how the faculty were using these in the classroom, how they'd been prepared, and really identifying what are good practices so we can share them with you and share them with your colleagues across the field in terms of how do we do this work and how do we do this work well? From those 10 institutions that we're implementing, we had results back from 9 of them in terms of surveys. And so the faculty who were part of this project had all mostly volunteered to be a part of the project. There were a couple of instances where it was more of a top-down, you need to be involved with this project, but for the most part, faculty were interested and wanted to be a part of this. And that's really critical, as Karen mentioned, in terms of the success of this, in the sense of being open to try new things and being innovative and really being committed to being self-reflective about one's pedagogy and what to do in the classroom and how to have a more sort of student-centered approach to one's teaching. 83% had chosen the adaptive courseware product that they used, and they did that together as teams. It wasn't just one faculty member from, say, the psychology department picking for everybody. They approached this from a team-based approach in terms of identifying what is the best tool that we want to use for our department, for our courses, and for our students. What's going to be the best fit for us? Several of them had already had some experience, but they weren't necessarily using these digital technologies to their full potential. So there's a lot of bells and whistles to some of these. Some of them are just shiny and pretty, and some of them are a little bit more effective as well. But in terms of using the data that's generated from these systems to actually inform one's pedagogy and work with students, as well as identify those students who are at risk and reaching out to them with interventions as soon as possible. And you'll see that almost 70% said that they felt they were well prepared to approach this project. And what that means is that, so APLU on the back end was working with the faculty as well as the academic administration to do professional development workshops and seminars. We were also connecting faculty with their peers at other institutions. So for instance, you know, connecting an economics faculty with another econ faculty from a different institution who's had several years of experience doing this, so they can have a conversation about what went well and what didn't go well and how they might approach their work. That way they're not kind of entering into this project blind without the supports they need. Now, the faculty that we worked with changed their pedagogy in many ways. So again, it's not necessarily about just integrating and having a tool on the back end. It's one of the things that, one of the benefits of the different types of digital learning technologies that are available is that it can free up class time to kind of do some more interactive things. So students, I'm sure anybody who's taught knows that students aren't always reading. I've been a student for a very long time. I wasn't always doing the homework as I was supposed to, right? But if your students were all to come to class having read the materials and being prepared in these gen ed courses, as a faculty member, what might you do differently if they already have that foundational knowledge? If you as a faculty member can see specifically where students are doing well and where they're not, perhaps you can really dive into those areas that they're excelling at and do something a little bit more dynamic in the classroom, or revisiting some of the content areas that students are struggling with. So the faculty that we worked with, we saw them doing more of these things, and you'll see a comparison group here. So as part of this research, we were looking at the faculty who were a part of this project, and we were also looking at their peers who were not a part of it. So you'll see kind of a comparison. That green group is sort of the traditional courses, and the blue is the faculty that we were working with. So you see that there was an increase in doing some of that just-in-time remediation, collaborative projects, and trying to make the class time a little bit more interactive for students. Sorry, there we go. All right, so majority of faculty also indicated that, what they were doing in the classroom, what they were doing was they were learning from the previous grant work that we've done. We've offered some sort of guidance and best practices. So when we work with a group of universities, we provide that information and support and professional development and have some little bits of advice in terms of what works well. So we've seen that students need to understand kind of why is this class designed the way it is? Because it tends to be a little bit different from their traditional courses. Initially, sometimes you have faculty who are concerned that, the students might be resistant in that they're going to have to do a little bit more work on the back end to prepare to come to class. We find that, within a few weeks, there's an adjustment and students tend to be fine with that. But the sort of in-class session on how to use the product, there needs to be a conversation with the students of why is, from a pedagogical standpoint, why are we using these tools? Why is it beneficial to you? What do we hope you can get out of it? They do tend to prefer that coming from the faculty rather than the product vendor. Students don't like to feel like they're being sold at, understandably so, but having some sort of grounding and foundational knowledge and understanding why do I need to spend my time doing this? Why is this beneficial to me as a student has been really helpful. 85% of the faculty indicated that they actively work to make the class time more interactive than what they had done in previous semesters. And we also saw more collaboration across the faculty, working with their colleagues and talking about, well, what are you doing in your class? What sort of activities are you doing? So rather than just doing it from an individual standpoint, we're seeing more community and collaboration within departments of kind of approaching these classes and the importance of aligning and improving the pedagogy in those classes and learning from each other. And another important thing is that I'd mentioned that, there's a lot of reports and features in the online systems that you can use with the adaptive elements, but what we've seen in previous grant work is that sometimes it takes a couple of semesters not only to kind of get a sense of how do I use this, but how do I actually start using the data that's made available to me in a way that's actually meaningful from a pedagogical standpoint. So now I have all these reports and these graphs on how students are performing. Well, what do I do with that information as an instructor? How can I work with my community here, my instructional designers, to create a more robust classroom experience? So we had faculty who were looking at, there's data that comes in at the whole aggregate course level, so you can look and see how all of your students are doing, and then you can kind of make modifications to what you're doing in the classroom based off of that. But also there's individual level student data. So you can look and see how specific students are doing in certain areas. There's a variety of reports that will pop up in terms of, are students at risk? Are they doing well? Are they maybe spending a lot of time in a particular area, but they're not progressing or don't seem to be learning that? And then reaching out to those students, either the faculty or maybe if they are fortunate enough to have a grad assistant or a teaching assistant to assist with that, or get them connected with the tutoring services on campus. But using that information, again, to identify those students early on to get them the support and resources they need for success in those classes and so that they can do well. Now, when we asked faculty how they thought that the courseware was improving their instruction, again, this notion of interactive class time. So one of the things that we've heard directly from the faculty, so Karen and I meet with a lot of faculty at the different universities that we're working at, and they, we were just on a call with the University of Toledo last week, and one of their chemistry faculty members was saying, I really felt like I was enjoying teaching again, and sometimes you find, doing the work can be very difficult, and she just felt that she hadn't had the excitement for teaching that she had when she first started. And she said that being a part of this project and being able to really kind of dive in and do different things in the classroom made her remember like why she likes to teach and what work that she likes to do, and being a part of this made it more meaningful for her at that particular time. So we were glad to hear that. Again, the monitoring of the class as a whole, as well as the individual students, the faculty indicated that this was helpful to them from, again, a pedagogical standpoint in terms of what should I be focusing on in terms of what I'm teaching, but also how do I help my students learn better? Because at the end of the day, faculty want to help their students learn. They want their students to succeed. And the more information you have, the better you're able to do that and be more prepared to, work with those students. They also felt that the systems themselves provided good feedback to the students. So the students will oftentimes they'll engage with these systems outside of class. Sometimes there'll be like an emporium model where they're doing lab work with these systems, but it provides real-time results to them in terms of how they're doing and points them to directions that you're not doing particularly well in a certain concept. Maybe you want to focus over on this area, and it's supposed to direct them to the information they need at that specific time to get them the confidence that they need, but also the understanding that they need to progress through the course. That's what that personalized learning is that we've often been referencing. We actually heard from the students as well. Karen and I have been involved with several, focus groups on campuses. Our colleagues at Digital Promise also conducted focus groups with several of the institutions that we were working with, and they're continuing to do that. So this is just the preliminary data coming out of those focus groups, because we think it's really important to hear from them and what their experiences are. So students are also saying, so not only do faculty have the sense that their students are learning better, but the students are also saying that they like these systems. They feel that they're helping them to learn the materials. They like that it allows them to track their progress and see how they're doing. They don't necessarily have to wait until their first exam to see if they're really understanding the material. It's more interactive and dynamic, more so than say a textbook would be, right? They actually get that feedback and those assessments. They don't have to wait for it to be graded. It's graded immediately, so they can get that feedback. And then also something that we're hearing from students is that they felt that it helped them to study more effectively. I've had conversations with some of the students involved in this project, and they say that, especially for an incoming student, like I can also speak to being I, as a first-gen student, I wasn't prepared for college maybe in the way that I was supposed to be. I didn't know how to study. And we're hearing from the students that these systems are actually offering them guidance and telling them, okay, you need to be focusing over here, rather than, highlight everything. It must be important. It's all going to be on the test. So it's giving them a sense of what are the areas that I'm doing well in? What are the areas that I'm not? What are the concepts that I need to be focusing on to study? And how do I use my time more effectively as a student? Because we also want them, we know they're busy, especially for, first gen and some of the non-traditional students. They have families, they have work, they're balancing a lot of different things in their lives, and they want to use their time in the most effective way outside of class to help them progress in these as well. And then confidence, again, so Karen mentioned that, and we saw that nice quote from our student at University of Mississippi. Students are saying that they feel like they have a sense of they know the material, and that gives them, that sort of emotional and mental boost that maybe they hadn't had in the past, because we know that that's really important to, how well they're doing and their well-being in general as students. Now, they did identify some areas of concern, and we saw this across the board. So students are pretty savvy. They can tell when the work that they're doing outside of the class is not either matching up or it's not being sort of addressed or spoken to in class. So one of the things that we talk about with faculty is making sure that you're aligning the content of the courseware into what you're doing in the classroom. And that could be as simple as just making reference to it and saying, you know, I saw that such and such percentage of you are struggling in this area, or this is a content area people are having trouble with, but also just making sure that the language sometimes is the same. So sometimes the textbook might use a particular type of phrasing, but in class or on the test, it looks a little bit different. And while that might be intuitive to someone who has a master's or a PhD and has been teaching it for a long time, sometimes the students need to have those connections made for them over and over. So they really want to see some alignment in what they're doing outside of class as well as inside of class, and know that the work that they're doing outside of class is helping them to understand that core content. About half of them indicated that they wanted more interaction with their instructor, and that tended to be for students who are more in kind of some of the Emporium classes. They're doing lab work, so they might be in those and they're getting more interaction, say, with like a teaching aide, but they wanted to have more face-to-face time with their faculty members. So we're working with institutions to figure out what are some other ways that we can do that, both online and offline, to make sure students are getting that one-on-one experience where we can do that and having more interaction with the faculty member. And of course, technology doesn't always work as well as we would like it. We're learning that as we've all gone online this last semester. Lots of crashes and bugs, but generally those are fixed fairly quickly with the vendor that's providing that support. And another thing that students were indicating is just having trouble finding a device or internet connection. And this is particularly relevant right now as students had to switch over to remote teaching and learning, in that, you know, and now they're also, their worlds have been upended, and, you know, maybe they're sharing their one computer at their home with their entire family, or maybe they don't have internet access, maybe they don't have a laptop, but they can't go to the computer lab on campus anymore. So this is a quote from one of our students at the two-year institution, and this was before everything happened with COVID, and just indicating that, you know, they were having to go to the McDonald's parking lot to get an internet connection to submit their homework. So in terms of thinking about it from an institutional and an instructional standpoint, if you want to use these types of tools, to be very aware of the realities that our students are dealing with and struggling with, to make sure that, you know, you're not actually harming them by, you know, not allowing them to have access to these tools. And if they don't, what can we do to provide them with that access, whether it's more computer lab space, or in the sense of now that we're online, how are we providing those students with those, you know, internet connections or supports, or flexibility in how the course is structured, when you're thinking, say, about synchronous versus asynchronous, and really accommodating those students in terms of what their schedules look like, and, you know, what the realities of their life that they have to manage in order to just even get to class, so they don't have to make those calculations in a way that's not beneficial to them. Now, as I mentioned, we worked with each institution with a group of leaders as well as the faculty teams. There's typically an academic administrator leadership, or someone from the Center of Teaching and Learning who kind of manages these projects that we work. And we did interviews with them as well, and they talked about kind of just some of the initial outcomes that they've seen in terms of what's going well from this project. And they said that, I mean, just off, it makes sense, is that, you know, faculty are reporting that, you know, having the professional development around what adaptive courseware or even just other digital learning technologies are available more broadly, and instruction. So not only what are these tools, but how to use them effectively. So having the professional development around that area. We've also seen that faculty who are part of these projects, they start, you know, they're very curious. So they want to like go and look and see, well, what else is out there that I could possibly be using and bringing into my classroom? What are other say university supports? Like maybe they haven't worked with an instructional designer before, maybe they haven't worked with supplemental instruction before. So just being more aware of what are the resources on campus, and also working with the academic leadership to identify where are some of the gaps, like what would make this work better for the faculty and better for the students, and where do we not have those supports. So those are some of the types of conversations that APLU will also have in thinking about, well, how can we maybe develop some resources on our end to help support things, but how do we also help institutions either get connected with other universities to you know, get some insight on how they've approached it, or even just thinking about where they might want to invest some of their funds to further develop and refine some of the institutional supports that they either have or don't have. Now, we also saw that there was a shift towards more responsibility towards student learning, and this isn't, of course, necessarily all faculty. Many of them are very interested in providing students with the education from a student-centered focus, but sometimes there is a little bit of lack of awareness sometimes for some faculty in some cases in terms of whose responsibility is it. So just taking more ownership as a faculty member, saying, rather than your students are just failing my course because they just don't get it, but okay, well, what am I doing to help my students learn? And maybe what are some other additional things that I could do to reach students who might have different learning needs or just different needs on the back end in terms of supporting those at-risk students who might need some additional supports. So really thinking about it from that student-centered perspective, rather than just, this is the class and good luck, right? So we've seen some shifts around that. Definitely changes in instructional practice. So what we've often said is it's not about the tools that we're using in these classrooms. They're certainly helpful. How do we use these adaptive systems and other digital learning technologies to support faculty to help them teach? And what are some of the other things that you could be doing in the classroom? As I can speak to as, someone who's gotten a Ph.D. I used to teach both at Georgia State and the University of Northern Iowa, is that many of us do not get any pedagogical training whatsoever. It's just that you are an expert in an area and then sometimes you're just handed the keys and expected to teach. But there's a whole science and discipline around how do you help students learn, and how do you refine that over time, and how do you continue to refine your craft over time? That's incredibly important. So we're seeing that a lot of the faculty are thinking about those things and making adjustments to how they're teaching. And that's been really beneficial, I think, from the faculty standpoint, but also the departments are reporting more camaraderie and collaboration as they're approaching this as a team-based effort. The faculty have also indicated that, they like having those conversations with their peers. They're like, oh, well, I've always been teaching it this way, and you're teaching the class that comes next, but you're teaching that same thing. Oh, okay, we should probably have a conversation about how we line this up, and thinking about, even teaching the entire program, what should the outcomes be? How can we talk together, and how can we do this better and more effectively for our students? So these are the types of conversations that are happening that were not happening to begin with. And just the self-reflective process of, what am I doing and why am I doing it? And how do I want to do it better? And how can I make this better for myself, but also for my students? And having, those kind of self-reflective process from a teaching standpoint has been really beneficial to the faculty. And they find that to be a really enlightening experience. So that's always good to hear from them. At the institutional level, we're seeing a lot more consistency across sections. There's been a lot of variability in the courses in terms of, say the drop, fail, and withdrawal rates can range anywhere between, 22 to as high as 80% we've seen, and that's for the same course. So what we're seeing is we're having this sort of team-based collaborative approach to how do we want to teach these classes. We're seeing that range get smaller. So students, their success doesn't necessarily depend on which faculty member they have in that class. And so that's been incredibly beneficial for them. And then also having more collaboration across different units that don't typically work together. So not even just within a department, but also bringing in, again, the Center for Teaching and Learning, the supplemental instruction folks, a lot of the faculty supports, advising and other student success initiatives, and bringing all these people to the table to have a conversation about, how do we want to work together to do better. So just summing up in terms of this particular project, it's a lot of work. We also imposed a deadline on folks in terms of when things needed to be done, but they actually found that participating in that and having clear timelines of when they needed to be doing this work over the next year for them really kind of catalyzed them to take those steps and make those steps and to kind of have an action plan and put it into practice and catalyzing those changes within their departments and at their institutions. And we've primarily been working at a small scale with a handful of faculty in different departments. The leadership are hoping to create good practices and models that can then be shared out across other disciplines in terms of what's working well, and learning from what doesn't work well and sharing that information at their institutions and with their peers. So ideally, we want them to be thinking about, how do I want to continue improving how this class is being taught over time, and just time and time again, always being reflective and analyzing what's working well, what's not, and making those tweaks each semester. And also, one of the things that we really want folks to be mindful of as well is, again, thinking about equity and thinking about the student perspective and what their lived experiences look like, what their class experience looks like, and meeting them and providing them with the resources that they need to do well. So that's an ongoing conversation that we continue to have, particularly when we see, say that the outcomes in terms of students who are passing or not, when there's still a discrepancy, saying, well, why is that still happening? And fixing the things that we can fix. We know that students kind of come in and that, the education system still has several inequities embedded within it. So how do we change policies and practices to make sure that we are providing the best supports for our students and our faculty to ensure that we can kind of, reduce those inequities altogether. And again, I just want to share these real quickly, and then I'll open it up for questions. So a couple of quotes from the faculty that we've been working with, and one of the things I want to point out. So one of the nice things about this project is we've been bringing all of the faculty together, not only at each individual university, but we've been offering professional development opportunities at conferences and convenings. We've taken those mostly online at this point in time, but bringing, last May, we brought several faculty from the 2-year and the 4-year institutions together so that they could just really talk about what they've been doing and what they've been struggling with and what's going well and what hasn't, and learning from their colleagues at other institutions. And that top quote is one of the leaders from a 4-year institution, and is talking about how, kind of the cross collaboration between the community colleges and the 4-year institution, and just hearing those experiences, they felt that their faculty had a better sense of really, again, the realities that their students are dealing with, right? And that maybe that looks a little bit different from when they went to college, and how they need to approach their teaching a little bit differently and be more mindful of the students and their lives as they're teaching these classes. And another thing that we are very mindful of is that thinking about how these technologies themselves might have biases and structures put into place that actually could be not beneficial to students, could be potentially harmful, in the sense of, do these penalize students who maybe have reading comprehension problems? How are these things designed? Like, all of them are supposed to be, say ADA accessible and meet those standards, but how might, these tools themselves actually perpetuate existing problems? And how do we identify those, and then also work with the vendor community to address those and improve those things, so that we can continue to improve these tools so we're not perpetuating those problems. So that's something that we're often mindful of, and also making sure that the faculty are mindful of that as well. And if it can't be the technology, well, how do we provide the additional support from a pedagogical or a faculty support or institutional standpoint to make sure that those students are getting what they need? I'm going to go ahead and end it there and open it up for questions for both Karen and myself. And thank you for giving us this time to talk at you for about 40 minutes and share this experience.
Thank you so much, Megan. And while people put in their questions, I just want to first of all, acknowledge you for this great work and for making all of these uncommon collaborations across the disciplines and across universities with people who are part of the same disciplines. And I think it's just very interesting, because that's a lot of the work that we are doing with first-gen students. So where you connect faculty to faculty, we're connecting students on different campuses who have the same majors or are connected because they're also first-gen. And I think, aligning the pedagogy that faculty need, and then aligning what students need that comes from the students to us so we can respond to that is sort of a similar organic way of how you're setting up the needs with the people in your universe. So anyway, just interesting cross section there. So, but we'd love to hear from you all, and go ahead and post in the chat, or you are welcome to just unmute and just go ahead and ask a question. And maybe even if you don't have a question to ask, some of you work already with Megan and Karen. If you want to share for some of the people who are interested in the best practices of this work, feel free to share how you are implementing these things yourself, even if you don't have a question.
So I'd like to respond to Mark's question about is there a resource summary report that shows which tech courseware were selected for which courses? We do have that data, and maybe we can, Mark, maybe you could just email me. We don't have that data in a form that we were ready to share here. But we're very, very careful about recommending only one tech and one courseware. And that's because the needs of different classrooms, even though, let's say you're teaching Biology 101 in California and you're teaching it in Wisconsin, the way that course is organized could be very different in those two states and those two institutions. So we are loath to recommend only one thing. What's important is that you evaluate, and we have some resources for evaluating your adaptive courseware, and that you talk to others. And I think that is important. So Mark, I put in my email earlier on, so if you would go ahead and also use that, I can send you a report that gives you more information about what we know about what courses.
Okay.
And then I see we've got another question from Kathy. Will these results be available to higher education instructors soon? How can this data be shared so that higher education can understand the importance of meeting all students' needs? So the short answer is it is being shared. And maybe it's not being disseminated in a way that we would like. But I see they put up the additional resources. So one of the sites that you can find this information on is the Every Learner Everywhere site. Right there is called Solved by Every Learner. But we also have publications. There's publications by SRI. There are publications by Digital Promise that are available on that site. There are other publications available. We published one journal with the current issues of emerging e-learning. We have another journal we hope to publish out. I'm now beginning to think it'll be the beginning of July rather than the end of June. We would look forward to continuing to share this with faculty and administrators. And Carol, you have a question? So if again,
I have a question. Yeah,
I know it's how we learn, and it's terrific. We learn from each other, and we've so enjoyed this experience at getting to know Carol and Celeste and Nita and the whole team that works on these issues and on the benefit of improving students' lives. Yeah, so in our work, again, I'm going to send you to the Every Learner Everywhere site. We've already published resources for recommendations around the post-COVID world. There's going to be a faculty playbook published within a week. We have resources on the APLU site on teaching and learning that are also available. So we're recommending those. We are under fast and furious development for another couple of assets. So if you could keep in touch with the Every Learner Everywhere site now has what's new and a newsletter available to you. So and then APLU also publishes new resources on a regular basis. So we'll be pleased to keep you guys in the loop so that we can distribute this information as fast as we can.
Awesome. Fabulous. Any other questions for Karen and Megan from the audience, or comments, other things that could be helpful? All right. Well, that was very informative, and thank you so much for your great work and your partnership. And I know everyone within GlobalMindED looks forward to helping your efforts to be more inclusive and have more of the first gen knowledge among faculty of how those students can be successful, not just in their first year classes, but to get them to graduation and then into really strong employment skills as well. So thank you very much for all your time today, and we look forward to being a great partner to advance your work as this goes on, and hopefully we can maybe even in August revisit this topic and give people some fresh ways to go back in the fall with what you all are doing and learning and sharing. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Bye.
so much. Thanks for attending, and we'll have this posted on the YouTube channel by tomorrow, so you can share it out with your colleagues at your different institutions. Thanks again to Megan and Karen, and Celeste, thanks for organizing us today. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.